webinar is called Introduction to Party Matrix. And our goal here today is to give you a high-level overview of what Party Matrix is. My name is Hai. I'm co-founder of Affluence, the company behind Party Matrix. And over the past decade, I've talked to thousands of customers. I've seen every single use case that you can imagine. And so what I'd like to do today is a couple of things. One, I want to help you understand the basics of Party Matrix. And hopefully with that, it'll provide you a framework to get the most out of Party Matrix with the least amount of work. You know, the 80-20 rule. What are the 20% of capabilities inside Party Matrix that will give you 80% of the value? And then finally, I want to help you envision what your work and life success would look like if you were using Party Matrix to its fullest potential. So hopefully this will get your motivation up and your brain thinking about how Party Matrix can actually benefit you. One of the things I like to always talk about is the challenges that I've seen customers face. First, team members seem to always have trouble understanding what's priority right now. And what's really interesting about it is it's getting worse and worse. The reason I say that is because, you know, if you have 5 things to do, it's pretty easy to keep track of it. But more so than ever before, each of us in our work, in our life, we just have so many things, so many areas of responsibilities. And therefore, you actually have a hard time determining what you need to work on at any point in time. And at the same time, you have challenge tracking the status of the work across all of those areas of responsibilities. And then thirdly, really over the last few years, communication from chat messages, emails are starting to inundate us. And so we're getting so many context switching every single day. I mean, I speak to my own personal experience, which is in the morning when I look at my emails, I see dozens, if not hundreds of emails. And the reality is most of them aren't important, right? But they're always pulling me towards all these different directions. And so it's extremely hard to stay focused. And no matter what you do, these challenges remain persistent. And so what we hope to do with Party Matrix and what I hope to do in this webinar is show you the capabilities inside Party Matrix to address some of these. So Party Matrix is a comprehensive email priority and project management software to help teams manage emails, conduct more efficient meeting, and get real-time status updates of projects and priorities. And so how does Party Matrix actually help those challenges that I mentioned? First, we use something called the 4-quadrant methodology, which I'll go further into details, to help promote effective prioritization. So at the end of the day, what you get out of Party Matrix is what you put into it. And what I want you to get out of it is how to use our software to actually help you track all those priorities, not just for yourself, but across the entire team. And then second, how do you track the status of all of those work? And so Party Matrix provide many different views, is what I call them, such as the one-on-one, the agenda, the timeline, to help you understand what needs to be done within the right context, right? Context is really, really important because any given day, any given moment, we might be doing, you know, something different. You might be in a meeting with your manager. You might be in a meeting with your direct report. You might be working with a colleague. You might be working for a client. And so at any point in time, you want to find out what you need to do with that context in mind. You don't want to go and see everything that's out there. And then thirdly, Party Matrix provide really deep integrations to the system you already use. In particular, we're probably the most integrated solution inside Microsoft Teams and Outlook for effective email and task prioritization. So what makes Party Matrix different? It's the only project email and meeting management software that is Microsoft 365 security certified across our web app, Microsoft Teams app, and Outlook app. And then we are leveraging AI to help teams and individuals achieve their goals. This is one of the areas that I'm really excited about. And really over the past 6 months, these capabilities have really exploded. And so what I'd love to show you today is how we can help you take those goals that you have and turn them into priorities so then you can actually work on them and achieve success. We also provide what's called people-centric collaboration. More than ever before, you know, if you use any project management software or list, you know, to track your tasks, you know that they're just task-centric or project-centric. One of the things that Party Matrix does really well at is actually thinking about in the context of people, because really how I see it is when you work on something, you're working on something for somebody, right? And so it's either your manager, again, or your client, or or yourself. And so what that means is, how do you understand what are the things you need to work on for that person at any point in time? And then finally, Priority Matrix is available as a SaaS, which is the standard software, our HIPAA compliant solution for healthcare life sciences, and then our Azure government cloud. And so if any of those interest you, please feel free to ping us or reach out to me. My email was listed in the beginning, hi@affluence or support@affluence.com. So let's look at the fundamentals behind the concept of Priority Matrix. There's a famous quote attributed to former President Eisenhower: "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." And I love this quote because it shows the two dimensions of everything that we have to do. And so, as I mentioned earlier, when I wake up in the morning and I see all these emails, guess what? They're urgent, right? Because you see the emails, and that's the first thing you do. Like, you look at them, you're like, okay, let me see what emails are any of these things actually what I need to respond to. And so that's the urgency aspect of it. It's just the attention needed. It pulls you away. But the challenge is the vast majority of those emails aren't important. They don't really further you towards your goals. Imagine if you actually didn't check your emails at all. And some people do this, essentially they block the first hour not to check emails or to read the news and get, inundated with information that's not relevant. Instead, they plan out their day. And so that's how you want to sort of think about it within the bigger picture. And then what's interesting is the important things are actually seldom urgent. And what that really means is that if you are really thinking ahead of time and you're planning your goals and so forth, you're working towards these important goals in a very steady manner. And so if you are doing it correctly, they shouldn't be urgent. Instead, they should be something that you're constantly striving towards. And so I love this quote because one of the things that I like to ask people to do, and imagine, I want you to think about this for a second too. Take out a piece of paper and write down everything you have to do. Now, you're going to have a list, and you're going to have a list that might be 3 items or 5. And if it's just 5, it's not too bad. You can go decide, what do you need to work on? And so what are do you pick at the top or do you pick at the bottom? And what's the chance that what you pick there is the most important one, the one that you really should be working on? Is it, 1 out of 5, 20% chance that it's important? Now, imagine that list was much longer, because you're thinking about all the goals that you have at your work, all the goals that you have for your career, and all the goals that you have at home. Now, that list starts to be 20, 30 items. How do you decide what to work on? And if you were to add more to it, do you add at the top or do you add at the bottom? Or do you add somewhere in the middle? And so if we don't have a sense of how to start, then how do we decide where to focus our time? And so imagine then you take that list, and I'm going to ask you to do add a dimension to it, which is 1, which of those things are actually important, right? As in, I got to get them done. And then which of those things are actually due real soon, right? And that's what urgency really means. And so if you were to do it that way, then what happens is you have this 2x2 matrix, right? What are the things that are critical and urgent? And that's what you got to do now. Because if you don't, that's bad things are going to happen. And then interestingly, what are the things that are important but not urgent? Those are the things that you plan for. And then what are the things that you can actually delegate to others? And when I say delegate, it actually, even if you don't have direct reports, delegating just means finding somebody else who can actually do a better job than you. And it's an interesting way to look at it, but like, you can think of a restaurant as a way for you to delegate the cooking and the cleaning aspect of it, right? And you can think about the same concept of delegation within services, within product, and either at work or at home, et cetera. And then finally, I don't see the point of tracking anything that's not important and not urgent, but instead you look at it as the inbox, which is where everything starts. And so you get in your inbox, just like your email inbox, this is where it starts, and then from there it belongs in one of those 3 quadrants. Now, what's really interesting is now you have a quadrant, a matrix, instead of a list. And here's where I ask you, take this matrix and walk around the office. Remember, this is on a piece of paper. Walk around the office and start comparing notes, right? Go to your manager and say, hey, by the way, these are my priorities. What do you think? Do we agree? Do we disagree? Where? What are the things we should reprioritize? And do the same thing with your direct reports or the other colleagues that you work with and say, hey, by the way, these are where I'm focusing my time. And this is what I'm going to get done. And if someone assigns you something, asks you to do something, ask them, hey, where does it belong within this matrix? Does it, is it in quadrant 1 or quadrant 2? Now, interestingly, what happens is that if you have a lot of things in quadrant 1, if everything is in quadrant, the do now quadrant, then you're firefighting. And that's not a good thing. In fact, if you use Party Matrix well, one thing you want to do is you actually want to start getting rid of the things in quadrant 1. And that's not so obvious. And I had a really great conversation with a customer. And he brought this to my attention. He's like, look, if everything you're always working on is in quadrant 1, it means you're firefighting constantly. And it was such a fascinating insight that I think about it all the time too. And that's what happens to us, which is we don't plan things ahead of time. And so we let the things brew. And so, we're not working on the things that really matter most. And so then you spend so much time on that quadrant 1. And so ideally, the quadrant 1 will start going away, and your quadrant 2 is where you're really focusing your time. And that's what I want you to think about as a takeaway here. So what's really interesting about all of this is that the 4 quadrants creates alignment because it forces you to prioritize from the beginning. This is the hardest part about Party Matrix. This is the hardest part about our software. This is the hardest part about prioritizing your day, because you can't have that list, right? You have to go and decide where they belong. If you can't decide what to work on, it doesn't matter if you do them right. And so it's more important to do the right things right than to do the wrong things right. Doing the wrong things right is a waste of resources. It's a waste of time. And so success from using Party Matrix isn't from finding that what everyone agrees on, right? Because that's easy. That's trivial. If you do this exercise that I mentioned to you, and you walk around the office and everyone agrees every single time on all the things that are priorities across your whole organization, across all your project, you don't need our software. You can just go and execute. But if you start finding discrepancy, that's where it's interesting. And that's where all the value is delivered inside Party Matrix. It's about discovering the things that are important that you actually need to address, and then discovering the things that are not important that you shouldn't be working on. So keep that in the back of your mind as you think about our software and as you use our software. Are you really achieving that? And sometimes people look at Party Matrix as just a way to track their tasks, which is fine. It does start there, but again, think about within the context of how does it save me time? How does it save me work? And how does it actually reduce my overall mental load? And so having things written down into these quadrants, into the Party Matrix quadrants, actually will make you feel more at peace, because you know what's really important. And then not only that, you know that others agree with you and that you're not wasting time working on the wrong things. So I do want to remind everybody that the webinar is recorded. And so, we posted on our website there. And if you go to that website, affluence.com/webinars, we also have additional webinars. And then the recording, as I mentioned, will be there. And so with that, I'm actually going to jump into the demo of the product itself. And then again, if there are questions that you have, feel free to send it in the chat. And so I can take a look at them and I'll try my best to address them. Okay, now I'm going to jump to the software. So here I am opening Party Matrix. As you can see here, I have the web app open. And so on my left-hand side are my projects. And so you can think of projects as areas of responsibilities, right? Maybe I have a project for my personal goals. I have a project for my team goals. I have a project for maybe a client I'm working on, or a project for a product, or a project in the context of an actual project itself. And so those are called projects. And then in the middle are those 4 quadrants that we saw. So the naming convention that we use here, the standard naming convention, is exactly the same. Do now, do later, delegate, and inbox. And so you can see when I add a task, I don't really just add them to a list. I add them within this quadrant. And again, that is the hardest part. But push yourself on that, push yourself on deciding whether or not there's something that you need to do now or do later, and if it's truly important or something that you can ask someone else to do for you. So let's say I want to create a task in Party Matrix that's actually very, very easy. I go click item here, and so I can say, imagine I say follow up with webinar participants due tomorrow. So what I've just done is I've just typed in a title for a task. We call it an action item because the action item just sort of signifies something that's broader than what a task is. And so then I have that. But one of the things I want you to also practice doing with Word Matrix is actually typing the due date directly here. So this is, we use natural language to go and interpret this in order for us to set due dates for you in order to save you time and effort in creating all of this. So you see how I'd say follow the webinar participant to do tomorrow. And when I click this task, our system creates a task, but because I say due tomorrow, it actually creates the due date for me. Now it shows up in my Party Matrix calendar. It'll actually send them a reminder to actually tackle it. And so you could say, due in 2 weeks, due in 3 days, or, due tomorrow, 2 p.m. And the time and date will also set as well. Now that I've created a task, on the right-hand side is what we call the item details. You can think of the item details as taking this action item and then actually having a lot more context around it. So for example, I have the project it belongs in. I can move to another project if needed. I can change the name of the task if needed. I can star it. Starring it means, hey, it is about communicating to Party Matrix that this is important. And if you star it, then Party Matrix does treat the task differently. And then as you scroll down, you have the ability to add icons. You have ownership. Ownership is actually really interesting. So every item in Party Matrix has an owner. The owner is the essentially the person in charge of the task, and then also that's the person whose avatar shows up here. If you have a team that's inside a team project, it'll be very obvious why you have all these avatars that shows up. Because, when you have 30 different tasks, you can see the avatars for different people and say, okay, John is responsible for this, Sue is responsible for this, and so forth. And so that's what the owner is. And what's interesting is there can only be one owner. And this is really fascinating because if there isn't, we have customers that ask, hey, I want multiple people to own this. Our answer is always no, because you want one person to be responsible, because responsibilities is so critical in terms of managing priorities and so forth. So everyone else who's interested in this task can be followers. And so you click on this plus, you can invite followers. And you can think of followers as telling Party Matrix that if this task gets updated, let me know. And so that'll show up in the alert section that says, the task so-and-so ABC has been updated, or the due date is here, et cetera. So you still get that notification. And then progress, 0 to 100%. 100% means it's done. Effort, how long does it take? Because that's different from due dates, right? Something might be due in 3 weeks, but the due date, the effort might be 1 day. So, it doesn't take you 3 weeks to get something done. And then one thing that's really cool is the reminders versus due dates. And I like this, and I talk about it because let's just say you have something that's really important you have to do in 3 weeks, but if you wait until that day comes, you're not going to get it done. And so reminder is about sending you a reminder ahead of time. And so I actually use this constantly. This is one of my top go-to capabilities inside Party Matrix. And I'll show you how it works. So for example, I have this due tomorrow, but what I can do is I can say, remind me daily. So what I've just done is I'm asking the system to send me a reminder, and it'll send me a reminder until I mark this task as done. And I do this all the time because when I have, an important customer that I want to follow up with, or somebody that I need to respond to, I can't always meet the deadline. But so I set a deadline, and then I set a reminder to actually bring to my attention. And then sometimes I change the due dates as needed. I love this capabilities because when you assign this to a team member and you don't know if they're going to get it done in time, what you can do is you can say, you can remind that person, but you can also say, remind everybody daily or weekly or something like that. And so what that does is it'll send a message to all the people who are in this task and asking them to actually, get started on this. It's so important, and it's a fantastic way to actually ensure that you stay on task and that the right things are actually worked on. And then finally, as you scroll down more, you see the chat section. You can think of the chat section as where you can type in messages, you can communicate to others within the context of this item. And that's an important thing as well. What happens is this: you're in a meeting, you're talking about 5 different things at any point in time. And then 2 months later, you go back and you can't remember exactly everything that you talked about, right? Because you've just had a conversation, but there was no single context. You were switching topics constantly. And the same thing happens to emails. The same thing happens to chat messages inside Teams. The same thing happens to text or as you walk down the hallway. So what Matrix does is it creates a single place for you to have a conversation about that task. And so when you type a message here, it becomes part of the history of the item. And it's called an immutable history. So it can't be changed. And the reason it can't be changed is because we want to track everything that's talked about the item. So then 3 months later, 6 months later, somebody else comes in, they can look at this and see the full history of the conversation. It is so important in several scenarios. One, imagine if you have a team member who's working on a very critical task, and then that team member is now on maternity or paternity leave, right? So they're not available. And you want to know, hey, how did we make these decisions? What were the things we've talked about in the past, right? And you bring in on a brand new team member. Well, that brand new team member can just open the Matrix task and they see the full history of all the conversation. And it goes back to a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And so suddenly you have all this information at your fingertips that otherwise would not be available. So that all that knowledge that was in someone's brain is actually here because you don't need them to actually remember all of those things. And so the chat to me is a really important capabilities. And it's more so than just about sending messages and so forth. But you can see that I can actually use the chat to also send what I call commands, right? Remind me daily, remind everybody weekly. And so whenever the text turned green, it means that our system is actually trying to interpret it because I can type in other things as well. I can change the due dates. I can assign it to people directly from this. And then the notes section is just a way for you to add additional context around the task itself. It's not intended to be rich text. But what happens is you can go and you can type in, subtask 1, subtask 2, subtask 3, right? Because maybe this particular action item has multiple things that you have to work on. So you can actually mark those as done. And as you do, the progress would update. And then finally, you have the resources. Resources is sort of a place for you to attach documents or links, anything that's actually relevant to this. And one of the most powerful things about Matrix is the ability to attach emails. So as I mentioned earlier, we get so inundated with communication that it's very, very difficult to have everything in one central place. And Matrix is designed to do that, which is to go and take all these communication, the emails and messages, and put it in one central place so you have the right context. And so with Matrix, you can attach emails as resources. So then everyone's on the same page, especially if it's an external communication. So this is called essentially the item details. And so one of the things that you can do with Matrix is actually create overarching goals. And I'm really excited about this capability because this is something that's relatively new. And so I'm going to go to this page, this web page right here. And I'm going to send everyone this link here inside the chat. So if you want access to this, you can go here. But imagine you probably have some goals in the back of your mind, right? And so there are some explicit goals, such as the things that are, that you're doing for your manager or you're doing for your client or whatever. But you also have some personal goals, right? Which is, for example, I typed in here, get a promotion to senior project manager and get a raise, right? That's not a bad goal. All of us could benefit from such goals. Like if you're new to your position, you want to know, hey, how do I best onboard myself so I can be successful at my goal? Or if you are in charge of operations, how do I improve the infrastructure at my organization? What Matrix is doing is it's taking this goal and it builds out a Matrix for you. So we're using something called generative AI. Again, you've probably heard so much about all this AI craze, and it's so powerful because what we're doing is we're taking the knowledge of the world and help you turn these goals into Matrix action item. The point is not to be perfect. The point is to give you a baseline. So you go here, you build my action plan, click on build my action plan. What it'll do is it'll work itself in the background, and a few minutes later, it'll create the matrix for you. So I have that type. I actually already ran this, and so I have it right here for you. And I opened this project that was generated by Matrix. And what's really interesting is you can type in whatever goals that you want, and Matrix will go and build these projects for you. So promotion to senior project manager, and you can see that actually we created a matrix here. And with this matrix, we actually came up with many different ideas on the ways that you can go and tackle this goal. But the interesting thing is that we use a very different matrix terminology. We use low effort and high impact, right? So if you were to think about what are the things you can do right now, you want to find the things with high impact but low effort. That's the equivalent of the do now. And so Priority Matrix takes a very different approach when it comes to goals or when it comes to other things than just your personal task. And so explore this capability, type in some of your goals, and it could be increase sales, it could be improve on marketing or something like that. And everybody's goals is different. And so with that, you can look at here and you can click through each of these and click on the notes section and see what Priority Matrix will tell you. And it's always fascinating for me to see the outcome of these the outputs of all of this. It's always different and it's always fascinating because many times it comes up with ideas that I've never thought of. But that's the point of this. So as I mentioned, you can see now that suddenly these matrix, both colors as well as the names, are actually customizable. And so I want to bring you to bring your attention to the project details. So I talked about the item details, but if you click on here, this opens the project details. So the project details has very similar well, a couple of things you can do. First, you can change the name of the project, obviously. Second, you can star the project. So it's very similar to starring tasks, but you can see how when I star projects, it actually pops at the top here of my list. Very easy for me to jump to, very easy for me to ensure that I'm focusing my time on not just the right task, but in the right project, right? And again, if you have a star project and a star task, that's a very powerful and easy way to make sure that you're focusing on the right thing. And then below that, you actually have members. And you can think of members, what are the people who are relevant to this particular project? And so when you create a project in Priority Matrix, what happens is typically it starts with just you, but then afterwards you can invite new people to it or others to it. And the way permission works is this. Everyone who's someone who's in the project itself can see everything within the project. That's how permission works. And so then if you have, let's just say, an external client that you're working for, like let's imagine you're a consulting firm. And so you have a client you're working for, you create a project for that client, and then you go and invite all your team members that's relevant to that project. And then you have another client, but different set of team members. And so then you add the appropriate people. And so permission control works like that. And you're able to delegate a task to someone who's not in a project and it shows up in their inbox instead. But if they're inside a project, they can see everything here. One nice thing about this is that it's one central place for you to see the priorities, right? And so when you have many different kind of work and you're constantly trying to juggle between all these priorities and so forth, and you don't know what you need to work on, well, Priority Matrix provide that context. And so you think of the project as a context then where it's very easy for the whole team to be aligned. And then if you scroll down, the quadrant names themselves are customizable. You can go and change the name of these quadrants. You can change the color. And the reason I want to bring this up is as you use Priority Matrix, you will build best practices, not just for yourself, but for your whole organization. And so the way best practices works is that, there are just terminology in your industry, terminology within your firm or how you think that just makes more sense than what we can possibly envision. And so earlier, for example, I had delegate here, but imagine instead of delegate, you actually want to use a different terminology and you can. And so that's how you customize the matrix. But here's the cool part, which is once you do have created your matrix, you can go here and you can save the project as a template. So what happens when you save a project as a template is that it allows you to essentially clone projects that you have along with all the deadlines, the timeline, all the action items that you have, and create it as a project that you can launch from scratch. So if you have an employee onboarding project, right? You save the project as a template. Then when you have a new employee, you just launch a new Priority Matrix project using that template. You just say this employee starts September 1st, and all the action items are created, all the priorities are created, and all the time, the deadlines are created. Really powerful way to save you a ton of time and resources. So I've shown you how to use the goals. I've shown you how to update your project, and I've shown you how to edit your task. Now I want to show you one more thing related to project, which is how to create a project from scratch. So if you click on this project view to create project, and when you go to this project, you can always choose a blank project or a template, like one of those things that I mentioned earlier that you can save as a template. We also have something called public templates. And essentially you can look at public templates as templates that we built up over the years, where, you know, these are some of the best practices we've seen around the industry. These are some ideas that you can start with. And so you can choose a public template, or you can start with a blank project. And so this is new test blank project. And then when you do create this project, you can actually choose couple of naming convention, right? So for example, the basic Eisenhower Matrix, or, you know, retroactive project analysis, etc. But I'm going to choose that, and I add project, and that's it. I've just created a blank project, and those 4 quadrants are there, and that's how you get started yourself. So I would advise you to go ahead, when you use Priority Matrix, create a blank project that are your personal goals, right? Or your personal task. And then create one for your team priorities, and then invite the appropriate people to each of those projects who need to see your priorities, who need to see the team priorities. And so then everyone will go and have one central place to see the shared priorities across the whole organization. So that's how a project works. Now, as I mentioned, Priority Matrix is deeply integrated into the Teams and Outlook integrations. So what happens to me all the time is I get a lot of tasks via email. And what I mean by that is somebody will send me an email, an external person send me an email. And from that email, I want to go and I want to ensure that I can respond to it in the appropriate time. So I'm going to jump over to Outlook now. Let's say you get an email. I'm sure this morning you didn't get an email. You probably got 10 or 20 emails at the very least. And let's say one of those emails is extremely important. What do you do? What do you do? People flag emails all the time. They can set reminders on the email, you know, come back and address it. And it works real well if you have 5 flag emails. If I were to flag all my emails, I would have hundreds of flagged emails. And then at that point, you know, it's the exact same things. If everything's important and urgent, then nothing is. And so flagging for me doesn't work, because it's just not sufficient in order for me to understand what I need to work on. What emails do I actually need to address today? So when I get an email, what I do is I go install Priority Matrix for Outlook. So if you haven't done that already, go to the App Store here, install Priority Matrix for Outlook. And then when I have an email, I can actually click on this ellipsis. I go down and open Priority Matrix, and I say prioritize email. What's going to happen is that Priority Matrix allows you to take this email that you receive in Outlook, create a task out of it, right? It takes the subject and put the task name here, but I can edit it, right? I can then choose what project it belongs in. So for example, there's that project I just created, and then I can choose what quadrant it belongs in. And then I can assign it to the appropriate person, and I can set a due date. So now look at this. I've just set a due date on an email. I've just prioritized the email in the appropriate project in the appropriate quadrants, and I can assign it to the appropriate people. Appropriate person rather. So what's useful about this capability is that, imagine a couple scenarios. One, you get an email from a client and you want to go, you already have a project in Priority Matrix for that client. Well, then when you create a task from that email, you want to put it in the appropriate context, right? And so then everyone who's working for that client understands that, you know, how it all fits together. Similarly, if you're working on a project, a construction project perhaps, or a real estate project, and now you're getting emails that's relevant to that, maybe it's a quote, external quote or something like that, you also want to go and prioritize that email so that everyone who's in that project know exactly what else we have to do or anything else that's relevant. And that's it. All I have to do is capture email. And so you see the moment I've done that, it opens the item details similar to what you saw in the web app. Now, if I were to go back to here, look at this. That task was created for me. It was set the due date for me, and it's in the right quadrant, allowing me to know that, hey, I know I can go and I got to go and answer this email. And because the due date is set, I'll get an alert in my home view that says, hey, this email is due. I can click on it, and it's in the email itself is in the resource section. And what's really neat is that we uploaded it as an EML file. So then what that means is other team members can access the email too. The last thing you want to do is when you get an email, you want to forward it, right? You don't want to create all these other threads around an email, and then afterwards invite additional people and so forth, especially if there's work for you to get done. And so imagine if that email has PowerPoint documents or Word documents or additional resources. Party Matrix allows you to track this much more readily and in a much more efficient manner to ensure that the most important emails are captured. So that's how email prioritization works. But here's another powerful thing about Party Matrix is that imagine if you get an email, but you already have a task that's relevant to it. Party Matrix is the only software that allows you to do something different, which is this. When I get an email and I want to attach an existing task, I can go and open Party Matrix instead. And when I do, I can actually search for that task, and then I can attach the email to an existing task. This is very, very helpful if you get multiple emails that are relevant to the same task, because now you can just not just create one task from an email, you can actually attach multiple emails to one existing task. Again, creating one central place to keep track of all of these important emails that you get. So that's very, very simple way to use Party Matrix for Outlook. One thing I want to talk about now is actually switching context to other form of communication. So as I mentioned, we're probably the most integrated solution inside Teams. So if you use Microsoft Teams, definitely go to the App Store, install Party Matrix. Then my recommendation is right-click on this, pin it, so then Party Matrix is right here for you to see. And as you can see, when I open Party Matrix inside Teams, I have the same view that I saw in the web app. And so I have the list of project, I have the quadrants, and then I have the item details and project details. The reason why this is so helpful inside Teams is then I don't have to switch context. I don't have to open Party Matrix in a web app. I don't have to install anything else. I can just go back and forth directly inside Teams here and access everything I need. But here's a couple of things that makes Party Matrix very unique. One, if I went to a chat, right? So for example, let's say I work with a teammate. And what I can do is I can go to this plus icon and I can choose Party Matrix. When I do that, I'm adding what's called a Party Matrix tab. And I can attach a project from Party Matrix into a tab and share with a teammate directly in a Teams conversation. But I can also do what's called a one-on-one. So I go ahead and I choose a one-on-one, and actually I've already created here. And what this one-on-one does is I choose the person, and now I see everything that I have to do for Eugenia directly from this view. You see, I don't even have to jump to Party Matrix. I'm literally seeing all of this directly inside my conversation with Eugenia. And so when I go here and I'm chatting with her, I can just open this and I see all the tasks. This is that people-centric view that I talked about, which is what we've just done is instead of showing you all the tasks you have to do within all these different projects and forcing you to switch between projects, instead, this takes everything that you have and find all the things you have in common with another person. If you have a one-on-one with your manager and you guys are working on 3 or 4 different projects at the same time, this will save you so much effort because you go here and you see all the things you have to do. And not only that, it's in this list form that makes it very easy for you to see the due dates. And you can sort by priorities, you can sort by quadrants, you can sort by ownership, name, when it's modified, and when it's due. And then not only that, you can actually add share tasks directly from here. So when you have a meeting, the one-on-one meeting, and then your manager says, hey, could you do XYZ? Instead of having to go and write that down, right, or switch it to Party Matrix, you can just go into the one-on-one view and create the task. And then what's nice about it is the manager and you are both added as followers. So the next week or a month from now, when you have your review, you can look at it directly. And then not only that, if you need to delegate to a team member, you can go directly here and create that task and choose the appropriate project and so forth. And then what I recommend again is to set the due date. If you set the due date, then it'll show up in your calendar. It's very easy to track. So for example, you see how here I can say call Sue tomorrow 2 p.m., right? And so that's the example here. And so what I can do now is when I do that, it creates a task assigned to her and then set the due date. And so I've just saved so much time where not having to switch contexts, go into another app because I'm doing it directly from Teams itself. But let's take it a step further, because imagine if actually she sends you a message inside Teams. And for example, here I have a message, hi there, could you send me a report? With Party Matrix, we can actually take any messages in Teams and create the task directly. So you can see the moment you do that, Party Matrix allows you to create the task from any communication inside Teams. You can choose the project, you can choose the quadrant, set the due date. Here's another capability that makes Matrix special, which is the ability to link back to that moment in time when you had that conversation. And this is all about that context that I was talking about. Because if you think about priorities, if you think about communication, it's all about context. Context as in, when did we talk about that? What were we talking about and why and so forth. So many times you'll create a task, right? But then you don't know, or you forget rather, what the whole conversation was around. So Party Matrix actually copies this link and it links back to that message that person sent to you, or that message that you sent to that person, even if it was weeks, months, or years ago. And then you can look back at that history and say, oh, okay, that's what we talked about. And that's why we're doing this task. So that's such a powerful capability, and it's helpful because, it's about all the things that we've talked about in the past, right? And sometimes we really forget them. So that's a capability inside Party Matrix. And we have several more capabilities, including the ability to attach Party Matrix action items here. You can see I can go to here and send a Party Matrix task directly in a Teams conversation. I can actually add Party Matrix tab to my meetings as well. So Party Matrix allows you to actually, if you go to the meeting here, when you have a meeting, so let's just say here, I'm going to see if I can choose an example meeting. Let's say I have a meeting, right? I can actually open Party Matrix and actually can add a Party Matrix tab agenda. So if you go to this plus here, you can add the Party Matrix itself. And what it'll do is actually it'll create an agenda for you inside this meetings, and it all links back into Party Matrix. And so what it's doing is it's actually identifying the tasks you have in common with the people in the meeting. And so it helps you surface up the things that maybe you can talk about, or that you should talk about, or that you can update the system. And you can see how I can do all of this without leaving Teams. And that's what makes Party Matrix so helpful about the whole context switching, because we spend so much time and effort switching between applications. It's really stressful, honestly. But Party Matrix allows you to access all of that in one central place. So I highly recommend you looking at that. Now, there's a lot more capabilities inside Party Matrix, obviously, and I can't go into all the details because, I don't want to overwhelm you. Instead, when I talk about, again, the 80-20 rule, what are the 20% of capabilities that gives you 80% of the value? And I've shown them here for you today. 1, create projects, right? Make sure the naming convention for these quadrants are appropriate to you. 2, when you create tasks, make sure that you set the due dates, right? Make sure that you're assigning to the appropriate person. 3, make sure that you create different projects for different goals and then have the appropriate team members in it, right? Some project might just be you, but others might involve other people, other team members. Make sure you add them appropriately, like here in the member section. And then 4, install applications in Teams and Outlook if you have access to those. And then if you just use that, you can create so much alignment today, like literally today, after this call, and you went and you create some of these goals inside Party Matrix, you create these projects in Party Matrix, and you just start writing things down, because what it'll help you create alignment across the team. And then what Party Matrix allows you to do next is that it ensures that if your manager asks you to do something and you say, by the way, I have a lot of things on my plate already, what do you want me to get rid of, right? What should we deprioritize? And if you do that, then I think that you will benefit yourself from ensuring that you are actually just taking on the appropriate amount of task. And then as a manager, if you are assigning something to somebody, you can also now understand where their priorities are. And so you also have to decide what are the things you have to deprioritize in order to ensure that you can actually tackle all these different tasks. Now, this is where I cheat a little bit, because I mentioned to you the quadrants as the core, but with Party Matrix, you can actually look at all this information from many different views as well. So for example, I have the quadrant view here, but every matrix has a list view. The list view, pro tip here, is for identifying things that are overdue. So when you go to the list view, anything that's overdue has a red date here. Very easy to spot them. A lot easier than the matrix view. And again, you can sort and so forth and change the due date directly. The calendar view takes all the tasks with due dates and show them up in the calendar. Again, I can click on each of these and actually look at them, but I can also just drag and drop them if I want to reprioritize. The Gantt chart view takes all the things that are due and actually allows you to build a Gantt chart. Some people really love this view as a way to see the timeline of what they have to work on. And if you go to Matrix resource section, you can actually link to items. For example, I can link items together, and then I can add dependencies. I can say these items are blocked by, or these item blocks. So item A blocks item B. To build a foundation, you got to pour the concrete before you can actually, build the walls, etc. So then task A blocks task B. So you can do all that. And if you do, Matrix will build Gantt charts for you and link them all together. But the neat thing about this is you don't have to use this. And the neat thing about this, you also don't have to do anything, because as long as you set due dates and so forth, the timeline view is built for you. You don't have to go and generate or anything. So these are sort of the high level overview of what Matrix is. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the presentation, and then I'll go and answer the questions that we have here. So as I mentioned, it's now up to you. And what that means is that, we can't, unfortunately, do the work for you. All we're doing with Matrix is creating a means for you to do that prioritization. And so, one, sign up for Matrix and use our apps and Teams and Outlook if applicable. Two, create those 3 projects, right? The personal priorities, the shared team priorities, and key initiatives. You can use that goal generating system that I share with you. 3, invite appropriate team members and pitch to them on why it's important to focus on high impact tasks. Again, you can be selfish thinking about this, which is you want to go and communicate to your manager your priorities, so then you're not going to get overwhelmed. Because if everything's important and urgent, you can't get it done. And also, you can say only 25%, only a quarter of the things I have can be in quadrant 1, and only a quarter can be in quadrant 2, which means we're going to drop everything else. And make sure that you set due dates, and make sure you put them in the appropriate quadrants, and don't put everything in quadrant 1. If you do, you're firefighting. You don't want to do that. And then make sure that you don't drop those tasks. Check in Matrix to ensure that you're actually addressing them. And then ruthlessly prioritize, because at the end of the day, it's your time, and you're not getting that back. So work on the right things, do the right things, and do them right, as opposed to working on the wrong things. So what does success look like with Matrix? If you are using Matrix correctly, and even with that 20% of capabilities that I mentioned, it becomes one central place to track all priorities. And these are both your priorities as well as your team priorities, as well as your organizational priorities. You can think of it as the matrix as a fractal, which means you have your overarching goals, and then you have the sub goals, and you have the actual action items, and you can create different projects in Matrix to track each of those. And then everyone on the team understands and are aligned on key tasks. You don't need to use Matrix to track every single small item. If some people do it, as long as they like the way that Matrix works, and some people will track every action item in it. But if you want to just use Matrix to track key tasks, it's perfectly fine. And then repetitive procedures are templatized. As I mentioned, once you create a matrix and you have all the tasks in them and all the due dates, once you create a template from that, when you launch new templates, all of those tasks are created for you. And then the due dates are set and so forth. They'll save you a ton of time. And what's nice about that too is that template is shared with your team. So then if someone is a domain expert and they've built out a whole process, ask them to templatize it. Now somebody else can go and launch from that, and it'll save them effort and time. And so every time that you do that, you're actually building you're building organizational knowledge, right? And you're actually making everybody a lot more efficient and effective. And then finally, make sure that you prioritize your emails. That's one capability that customers really benefit from, which is ensuring that the most important emails are not dropped and do not fall through the crack. And so with that, I conclude the presentation part on my side. And so I'm going to go ahead and look in the chat here to see if there's any questions, and I'll try my best to address them. Okay, so I have some questions here. So regarding signing in, what happens is if you're using the iPhone app, I just want to make sure, maybe Sean, maybe one thing that you can do is you can send a message or support at Affluence, maybe attach some of the screenshots that you have here in terms of signing in, so that we know what the issue is, because it sounds like, What happens is with Matrix, you can sign in using your Google sign in, your Microsoft sign in, as well as your email address. So we typically recommend using your Microsoft sign in and Google sign in because it actually simplifies the whole process. You don't have to have a password with Matrix, and then that authorization is actually all done sort of in the background. And so if you're with the IT organization, Matrix allows you to have access control as well. So what that means is that when a company an employee leaves, or you need to deny access an employee, then you can actually just use our SSO sign in for that. But if you have problem accessing or trying to signing in on your personal account using your email, Sean, maybe you can shoot us an email with a screenshot. We can take a look at it and have someone respond to you. The next question is very good also, which is how do you change a project template? So the way the template works is when you save Matrix as a template, it saves as a name. And so that name is unique. So what that means is, for example, employee onboarding. And so when you save a new template, let's say you launch that template, you start editing it, then you save it as a template again, it'll overwrite the previous template. Now, it overwrites, and what that means is, you'll lose access to the previous version as well. But there's only one template per name, and so that's how you can overwrite previous ones. That's a very good question. So essentially, if you want to change and have different processes, for example, employee onboarding, but then you have additional information, make sure that you name the project appropriately, then you save it. Are there any other questions? And so again, this is an opportunity for you to go and ask me any questions that are top of mind, because this is I can discuss use cases, so I can show you additional capabilities as needed. The other thing I want to mention too is you can always reach back out to me if you have any questions, especially if you're looking at deploying Matrix on a broader level and ensuring that your whole team is on the same page. So hi@affluence.com. I'm happy to answer your questions or give you ideas at least on how to best leverage Matrix. With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I appreciate your time.